Morning students, my name is M. Sasikala, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KCS Kasinoda College of Arts and Science. In this video, I am going to explain Indigenous Australian writers from Australian literature. The Aboriginal Australians and Torres Strait Islander peoples' literary works such as fiction, poems, essays and plays are called Indigenous Australian literature. In early days, Aboriginal writings were through dictation. It was in the Roman alphabet. In 1796, Bennelong dictated a letter to Lord Sydney Stewart, Mr. Phillips. This letter is considered the first literary work in English by the Aboriginal Australians. The words of Aboriginal Australians in traditional languages were paraphrased or translated into English language. Bennelong letter. Ullaravara Bennelong was a senior man of the Eora. The Eora are an Aboriginal Australian people of New South Wales. He served as an interlocutor between the Eora and the British. Arthur Phillip was the first governor of New South Wales. Some white settlers were friendly with Aboriginals. They helped to write for Aboriginal Australians to government authorities. In 1870, James Anapan with George Taplin translated Engaranjeri oral narratives into written English in South Australia. Later, Aboriginal people learned to write in English by themselves. Aboriginal Australians started writing their own letters and petitions to government officials. William Ferguson, an Aboriginal Australian, wrote the story of Nanya. It was told to him by Harry Mitchell around 1920. David Anapan is considered as the first Aboriginal author. He is best known for his booklet Native Legends and his autobiography My Life Story. The contemporary Aboriginal writing starts with the publication of Udjiro Nunakal, Kate Walker, first poetry collection in 1964. The Aboriginal voices came to light through the poem We Are Going, written by Udjiro Nunakal. Along with Udjiro Nunakal, Kevin Gilbert, Jack Davis and Colin Johnson founded the contemporary Aboriginal literature. The Dawn is at Hand, My People in 1970 are the other important works of Udjiro Nunakal. Gilbert's first collection of poems, End of Dreamtime, but the work was edited without his permission. In 1978, Gilbert published People or Legends. His other important works are Because a White Man Will Never Do It in 1913, The Cherry Pickers, written in prison in 1968 but published in 1988. It was a play. Inside Black Australia, published in 1988. It was an anthology of poetry. Lionel Fogarty is the most important Aboriginal Australian poet. Mudro called Fogarty a guerrilla poet, that means a word warrior. His poems are centered on Australian Aboriginals' life. His first novel, Wildcat Falling. Autobiography and biography. Sally Morgan's My Place, published in 1987, is the first bestseller of Aboriginal authors' publication. Other important biography and autobiography, Ella Simons' Through My Eyes, Margaret Tucker's If Everyone Cared, Ida West's Pride Against Prejudice. Fiction. Wildcat Falling, 1965, was the first Aboriginal novel written by Colin Johnson, but today, Monica Clare's Carobran, 1978, is regarded as the first Aboriginal novel. It is her own experience in New South Wales. Herb Wharton's True Country, Mudro, Long Live Santabara, Master of the Ghost Dreaming are the other example for fiction. James Anapan contributed to accounts of Engaranjeri mythology written by the missionary George Taplin in South Australia. He was a political activist, writer, preacher and inventor. The stories were published in 1930 as Myths and Legends of the Australian Aboriginals. This work is a part of the classical culture of Australia. This collection has varied subjects such as sports, hunting, fishing, and witchcraft. The stories are the great contribution of Anaipon, Australia's first Indigenous author. In 1963, Yolngu people of Arnhem Land sent the petitions to the Australian Parliament. This is known as the Yirrkala Bar petition. Yolngu or Yolno are an aggregation of Aboriginal Australian people inhabiting northeastern territory of Australia. The petitions were written in the Yolngu language with an English translation. The Yolngu people owned the land and they protested the federal government who had granted mining rights to a private company. Ujiro Nunakal. Ujiro Nunakal was a famous Aboriginal poet, writer, and right activist. She published the first Aboriginal book of verse, We Are Going. This poem explains the Aboriginal connection with the land. This poem tells about the Aboriginal oppression in the hands of white men. She also criticizes the white men have not given respect to their land and its people. Children's writing. The Aboriginal Children's History of Australia, 1977, is one of the most important work of Aboriginal Australian literature. The book was the contribution of Aboriginal children from 49 schools across Australia. This book includes dreaming stories, oral histories, arrival of whitefellows, cattle stations, etc. Dr. Anita Marianne Hayes. She is an Australian author and cultural activist. She is an advocate for Indigenous literature and literacy. Other important activists and writers are Noel Pearson, Jack Davis, Kevin Gilbert. Students, these are the references for your further studies. Thank you, students. Thank you so much.